Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 12, so let's get into it. Chapter 12, Emily Greenstreet. One afternoon, all five of them were sitting cross-legged in a circle in the vast empty middle of the sea. It was a baking hot summer day, and they had gone out there with the intention of attempting a ridiculously elaborate piece of collaborative magic. A 5-person spell that, if it worked, would sharpen their vision and hearing and increase their physical strength for a couple of hours. It was Viking magic, battlefield magic designed for a raiding party, and as far as any of them knew, it hadn't been tried in roughly a millennium. Josh, who was directing their efforts, confessed that he wasn't completely sure it had ever worked in the first place. Those Viking shamans did a lot of empty boasting. They had started drinking early over lunch. Even though Josh said everything was ready at noon, done deal, good to go, let's hook it up, by the time he actually gave them their handouts, spiral ring pages of Old Norse chants scratched out in ballpoint in Josh's neat, tiny runic script, and prepared the ground by pouring out a weaving. Branching not in black sand on the grass, it was almost 4. There was singing involved, and neither Janet nor Quentin could carry a tune, and they kept cracking each other up and having to start over. Finally, they got all the way through it, and they sat around staring at the grass and the sky, and the backs of their hands and the clock tower in the distance, trying to tell if anything was different. Quentin jogged to the edge of the forest to pee, and when he got back, Janet was talking about somebody named Emily Greenstreet. "Don't tell me you knew her," Elliot said. I didn't, but remember I roomed with that cow, Emma Curtis, during first year? I was talking to her cousin last week when I was home. She lives near my parents in L.A. She was here then. Told me the whole story. Really? And now you're going to tell us, Josh said. It's all a big secret, though. You can't tell anybody. Emma wasn't a cow, Josh said. Or if she was a hot cow. She's like one of those Wagyu cows. Did she ever pay you back for that dress she threw up on? He was lying on his back, staring up into the cloudless sky. He didn't seem to care if the spell had worked or not. No, she didn't, and now she's gone to Tajikistan or something to save the vanishing Asiatic grasshopper or something. Cow. Who's Emily Greenstreet? Alice asked. Emily Greenstreet, Janice said grandly, savoring the rich, satisfying piece of gossip she was about to impart, was the first person to leave Brakebills voluntarily in 150 years. Her words floated up and drifted away like cigarette smoke in the warm summer air. It was hot out in the middle of the sea, with no shade, but they were all too lazy to move. She came to Brakebills about 8 years ago. I think she was from Connecticut, but not fancy Connecticut, with the money and the Kennedy cousins and the Lyme disease. I think she was from New Haven or Bridgeport. She was quiet, sort of mousy-looking. How do you know she was mousy-looking? Josh asked. Shh! Alice whacked Josh on the arm. Don't antagonize her. I want to hear the story. They were all lying on a stripy blanket spread out over the ruins of Josh's sand pattern. I know because Emma's cousin told me. Anyway, it's my story, and if I say she was mousy, then she had a tail and she lived on Swiss fucking cheese. Emily Greenstreet was one of these girls that nobody ever notices, who are only friends with other girls nobody notices. Nobody likes or dislikes them. They have weak chins or chickenpox scars, or their glasses are too big. I know I'm being mean. But, they're just sort of at the edge of everything. She was a good student. She kept busy and got by in her boring little way until her 3rd year, when she finally distinguished herself by falling in love with one of her professors. Everybody does it, of course, or at least the girls do, since we all have daddy complexes. But usually it's just a crush and we get over it and move on, or some loser guy our own age. But not our Emily. She was deeply, passionately, delusionally in love. Worthing Heights love. She stood outside his window at night. She drew little pictures of him in class. She looked at the moon and cried. She drew little pictures of the moon in class and cried at them. She became moody and depressed. She started wearing black and listening to the Smiths and reading Camus and the original whatever. Her eyes became increasingly pouchy and sunken. She started hanging out at Wolf. All groaned. Wolf was a fountain in the maze. Its official name was Van Pelt, after an 18th century dean, but it depicted Romulus and Remus suckling from a she-wolf with many dangling wolf boobs, hence Wolf. It was the chosen hangout of the Goths and the artsy crowd. Now, she had a secret, capital S, and ironically, it made her more attractive to people, because they wanted to know what her secret was. And sure enough, before long a boy, some deeply unfortunate boy, fell in love with her. She didn't love this boy back, since she was saving all her love for Professor Sexy Man, but he made her feel pretty damn good, since nobody had ever been in love with her before. She strung him along and flirted with him in public in the hope that it would make her real love and interest jealous. Now we turn to the 3rd point in our little triangle of love. By all rights, the professor should have been completely impervious to our Emily's charms. He should have had an avuncular little chuckle over it in the senior common room and then forgotten about it. She wasn't even that hot. Maybe he was having a midlife crisis. Maybe he thought a liaison with Miss Greenstreet could restore to him some of his long-vanished youth. Who knows? He was married too, the idiot. We'll never know exactly what happened or how far it went, except that it went too far, and when Professor Sexy Man came to his senses or got what he wanted, and he called it off. Needless to say, our Emily became even gothier and weepier, and more like a gory drawing than she already was, and her boy became even more besotted, and brought her presents and flowers and was supportive. Maybe you knew this? I don't know. I didn't. But Wolf used to be different from the other fountains. That's why the Doomers started hanging out there in the first place. You wouldn't notice what was off about it at first, but after a while you'd realize that when you looked into it, you wouldn't see your own reflection, just empty sky. And maybe, if the sky was cloudy on that particular day, the sky in the fountain would be blue, or the other way around. It definitely wasn't a normal reflection. And every once in a while, you'd look into it and you'd see other faces looking up at you, looking puzzled, as if they were looking into some other fountain somewhere else and were weirded out because they were seeing your face and not their own. Somebody must have figured out a way to switch the reflections in two fountains, but who did it and why? And how? And why the dean didn't change them back, I have no idea. You have to wonder, too, if it was more than just the reflections, if you could dive down into one pool and come up in the other one, in this world or some other world, there's always been something off about those fountains. Did you know they were here before Brakebills? They built the school to be near them, and not the other way around, or that's what people say. Elliot snorted. Well, that's what people say, darling. Anyway, Janet went on. The thing is, Emily started spending a lot of time at Wolf, just smoking and hanging out and I guess mooning over her little affair. She spent so much time there that she started to recognize one of the faces in the fountain, somebody like her, who was spending a lot of time at the other fountain, the one in the reflection. Let's call her Doris. After a while, Emily and Doris got to noticing each other. They'd acknowledge each other, a little wave, just to be polite. Probably Doris was a little mopey too. They got to feeling like kindred spirits. Emily and Doris worked out a way to communicate. Again, the exact details have eluded your intrepid correspondent. Maybe they held up signs or something. They must have had to be in mirror writing or make sense as reflections. Or am I getting that wrong? I don't know how things worked in Wolfland, where Doris lived. Maybe magic is different there. Or maybe Doris was fucking with our Emily. Maybe she was sick of hearing Emily whine about her love life. Maybe there was something really wrong with Doris. Maybe she was something genuinely evil. But one day, Doris suggested that if Emily wanted her lover back, maybe her appearance was the problem, and she should try changing it. A chill settled over the group, where they lay on the sun-warmed turf. Even Quentin knew that using magic to alter one's physical appearance never ended well. In the world of magical theory, it was a dead spot. Something about the inextricable recursive connection between your face and who you were, your soul, for lack of a better word, made it hellishly difficult and fatally unpredictable. When Quentin had first gotten to Breakbills, he'd wondered why everybody didn't just make themselves ridiculously good-looking. He'd looked at the kids with an obviously flawed feature, like Gretchen with her leg or Elliot with his twisted jaw, and wondered why they didn't get somebody to fix them up, like Hermione with her teeth in Harry Potter. But in reality, it always ended in disaster. Poor Emily, Janet said. When she took down the spell that Doris taught her through the fountain, she actually thought she'd found it, the secret technique everybody else had missed. It was elaborate and costly, but it really looked like it might work. After a few weeks of laying the groundwork, she put it together one night by herself in her room. But do you think she felt... how do you think she felt when she looked in the mirror and saw what she'd done to herself? You could almost hear a note of genuine sympathy in Janet's hard voice. I can't imagine. I really can't. It was late enough in the afternoon now that the shadows from the forest had almost stretched out from the western edge of the sea, far enough to lap at the edge of their blanket. Must have been she could still talk, because she got word to her boy that she was in trouble, and he came to her room, and after much preliminary whispering through the keyhole, she let him in. And we have to give our boy credit. It must have been bad, very bad, but he stuck by her. She wouldn't let him go to the faculty. Dunleavy was still dean, and she would have kicked Emily out without thinking about it. So he told her to stay there. Don't move. Don't do anything to make it worse. He would go to the library and see what he could find. He came back just before dawn, thinking he had it pretty much worked out. You can imagine the scene. They'd both been up all night. They're sitting cross-legged on her little bed, her with her scrambled head, him with about 8 books open around him on the covers. He's mixed up a few regents and cereal bowls from the dining hall. She's leaning what's left of her forehead against the wall, trying to keep cool. The blue in the window is getting brighter and brighter. They've got to take care of this soon. She'd probably gone past panic and regret at this point, but not past hope. But then, think about his state of mind. In a way, for him, it was the perfect thing to have happened. This is his golden moment, his chance to be the hero, to save her and win her love, or at least some pity sex. It's his chance to be strong for her, which is the only thing he's ever wanted to do. But I don't know. I think he'd had enough time at this point. Maybe he'd figured out what was really going on. I'm guessing the dime had finally dropped. She'd taken a terrible chance, and he had to know she hadn't done it for him. Either way, he was in no shape to be doing major wizardry. He was tired and scared and in over his head, and I think his heart must have been broken a little too. Maybe he just wanted it too badly. He launched into the repair spell, which I happen to know which one it was. It was from the Major Arcana, Renaissance stuff. Big energies. It got away from him in the worst possible way. It took him over, took his body away, right in front of her eyes. He burned up, screaming, blue fire. He became a Niffin. That's what Fogg was talking about that night in the infirmary, Quentin thought. About losing control. Apparently the others knew what the word meant. Niffin. They stared at Janet like they'd been turned to stone. Well, Emily freaked out. I mean, freaked out. Barricaded the door, wouldn't let anybody in until her beloved professor himself showed up. By that point, the whole school was awake. I can only imagine how he felt, since in a way, the whole thing was his fault. He can't have been too proud of himself. I suppose he would have had to try to banish the Niffin if it didn't want to leave. I don't know if even he could have. I don't think those things really have an upper limit. Anyway, he kept his head, kept everybody else out of the room. He put her face back, right there on the spot, which cannot have been easy. Whatever else he was, he must have been some magician, because that spell that came through the fountain, that was a nasty piece of work. And she probably twisted it up even more in the casting, too. But he parsed it on the fly and made her reasonably presentable, though I hear she's never been quite the way she was. Not like she's deformed or anything, just different. Probably if you hadn't met her, you would never know. And that's pretty much it. I can't even imagine what they told the boy's parents. I hear he was from a magical family, so they probably got some version of the truth, but, the clean version. There was a long silence. A bell was clanging far away, a boat on the river. The shadow from the trees had flooded all the way over them, deliciously cool in the late summer afternoon. Alice cleared her throat. What happened to the professor? You haven't figured it out? Janet didn't bother to conceal her glee. They gave him a choice. Resign in disgrace or transfer to Antarctica. Break bills south. Guess which one he took. Oh my God, Josh said. It was Mayakovsky. That explains a hell of a lot, Quentin said. Doesn't it, though? Doesn't it just? So what happened to Emily Greenstreet? Alice asked. She just left school? There was a trace of ground steel in front of her, in her voice. Quentin wasn't totally sure where it was coming from. What happened to her? Did they send her to a normal school? I hear she does something businessy in Manhattan, Janet said. They set her up with an easy corporate job. I don't know, management consulting or something. We own part of some big firm. Lots of magic to cover up the fact that she doesn't do anything. She just sits in an office and surfs the web all day. I think part of her just didn't survive what happened, After that, even Janet stopped talking. Quentin let himself drift among the clouds. He felt spiny from the wine, like the earth had come untightened and was wobbling loose on its gimbaled base. Apparently, he wasn't the only one, because when Josh stood up after a few minutes, he immediately lost his balance and fell over again on the turf. There was scattered applause. But then he stood up again, steadied himself, did a slow, deep knee bend, and executed a perfect standing backflip. He stuck the landing and straightened up, beaming. It worked, he said. I can't believe it. I take back everything bad I ever said about Viking shamans. It fucking worked. The spell had worked, though for some reason Josh was the only one who got anything out of it. As they picked up the picnic things and shook the sand out of the blanket, Josh did laps around the field, whooping and making huge superhero leaps in the fading light. "I'm a Viking warrior! Cower before my might! Cower! The strength of Thor and all his mighty hosts flows through me, and I fucked your mother! I fucked your mother!" "He's so happy," Elliot said dryly. "It's like he cooked something and it came out looking like the picture in the cookbook." Eventually, Josh disappeared in search of other people to show off to, loudly singing the battle hymn of the Republic. Janet and Elliot straggled off in the direction of the cottage, Alice and Quentin toward the house, sunburnt and sleepy and still half drunk. Quentin had already made up his mind to nap through dinner. "He's going to hurt somebody," he said, "probably himself. There's some damage resistance built in, strengthening the skin and the skeleton. He could put his fist through a wall and probably not break anything. Probably. If he can, he will." Alice was even more quiet than usual. It wasn't until they were deep in the twilight alleys of the maze that Quentin saw that her face was slick with tears. His heart went cold. "Alice. Alice, sweetheart." He stopped and turned her to face him. "What is it?" She pressed her face miserably into his shoulder. "Why did she have to tell that story?" she said. "Why? Why is she like that?" Quentin immediately felt guilty for having enjoyed it. It was a horrible story, but there was something irresistibly gothic about it, too. "She's just a gossip," he said. "She doesn't mean anything. Doesn't she?" She pulled back, fiercely wiping her tears with the backs of her hands. "Doesn't she? I always thought my brother died in a car crash." "Your brother?" Quentin froze. "I don't understand." "He was 8 years older than me. My parents told me he died in a car crash, but that was him. I'm sure it was." "I don't understand. You think he was that boy in the story?" She nodded. "I think it was. I know he was." Her eyes were red and rubbed with rage and hurt. "Jesus. Look, it's just a story. There's no way she could know." "She knows." Alice kept walking. "It all works out, the timing of it. And he was like that. Charlie. He was always falling in love with people. He would have tried to save her himself. He would have done that." She shook her head bitterly. "He was stupid that way." Maybe she didn't know. Maybe Janet didn't realize it was him. That's what she wants everybody to think. So you won't realize what a howling cunt she is. Howling was a big word at Breakbills that year. Quentin was about to keep defending Janet when something else clicked. "That's why you weren't invited here," he said quietly. "It has to be, because of what happened to your brother." She nodded, her eyes unfocused now, her relentless brain chewing away at this wrinkle, fitting other things into the bleak new picture it created. "They didn't want anything to happen to me. As if it would. God. Why is everybody else in the world but us so fucking stupid?" They stopped a few yards short of the edge of the maze, in the deep shadow that pooled where the hedges grew close together, as if they couldn't face the daylight again. Not quite yet. At least now I know," she said. "But why did she tell that story, Q? She knew it would hurt me. Why would she do that?" He shook his head. The idea of conflict within their little clique made him uncomfortable. He wanted to explain it away. He wanted everything to be perfect. "She's just bitter," he said finally, "because you're the pretty one." Alice snorted. "She's bitter because we're happy," she said. "And she's in love with Elliot. Always has been. And he doesn't love her." She started walking again. "What? Wait? What? Wait." Quentin shook his head as if that would make all the pieces fit together again. "Why would she want Elliot? Because she can't have him?" But Alice said bitterly, without looking back at him. "And she has to have everything? I'm surprised she hasn't come after you. What, you think she hasn't slept with Josh?" They left the maze and climbed the stairs to the rear terrace, lit by the yellow light coming through the French doors and littered with premature autumn leaves. Alice cleaned herself up as best she could with the heels of her hands. She didn't wear much makeup anyway. Quentin stood by and silently handed her tissues to blow her nose with, adrift in his own thoughts. It never failed to astonish him, then or ever, how much of the world around him was mysterious and hidden from view. And that's it for today. We'll see you guys next week.